Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we embark on a journey through time, exploring the saga of the Afrikanner trekkers, their ceaseless wanderings, their arduous lives in motion, and the historical echoes that trailed them into the heart of Africa. The night air is still, heavy with the weight of untold stories. Above us, a tapestry of stars stretches across the vast African sky, silent witnesses to the tales we're about to unfold. Close your eyes and picture the scene. The rhythmic creak of wooden ox wagons cutting through tall, dry grass. The deep, guttural sounds of oxen straining against their yokes. The soft patter of children's bare feet on sun-baked earth. Life on the frontier was far from the romanticized tales often spun around campfires. It was a slow, bitter existence, punctuated by moments of unimaginable cruelty. We gather here beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient baobab, not to glorify their struggles or absolve their actions, but to seek understanding. The Voortrekkers were a people caught in the crosshairs of history, suspended between grand ambitions and dire necessity. They traversed the land with an odd assortment of possessions: firearms and well-worn Bibles, cured meats and battered cooking pots. Their very lives were tethered to wagons that frequently faltered, wheels shattering against unyielding stone, axle grease evaporating under the merciless African sun. The land itself seemed to conspire against these newcomers. Relentless drought reduced promising crops to little more than dust. Mysterious fevers claimed the lives of innocent children in the dead of night. Unexpected clashes with indigenous kingdoms erupted without warning, shattering the uneasy peace. And pervading it all was an inescapable sense of alienation. These were strangers in an ancient land, unable to decipher its age-old rhythms and secrets. Tonight, we peel back the layers of time to reveal the harsh realities of Voortrekker life. We'll step into their world, a world far removed from comfort, safety, or certainty. We'll recount the tale of Ernest in camp, whose diary entries paint a vivid picture of life on the move. The constant fear of attack, the struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a nomadic existence, and the weight of responsibility that fell on women's shoulders to keep families intact amidst chaos. We'll venture into the rolling hills of the Eastern Cape, where dreams of new beginnings clashed violently with established kingdoms. We'll examine the intricate beadwork of the Xhosa people, each pattern a silent testament to a rich culture that predated the arrival of the trekkers by centuries. And finally, we'll cross the threshold of a Boer farmstead, where the aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with the acrid smell of gunpowder, where children's laughter is often overshadowed by hushed discussions of impending danger. This is not merely a recounting of grand historical events or the deeds of renowned leaders. It's a glimpse into the lives of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Their hopes and fears stretched thin across a harsh and unforgiving frontier. As we delve deeper into their story, we must remember that history is rarely black and white. The Voortrekkers were both victims and aggressors, pioneers and invaders. Their journey into the African interior left an indelible mark on the land and its people, shaping the course of history in ways that continue to reverberate today. We'll explore the complex relationships between the trekkers and the various African peoples they encountered. From tense negotiations to violent confrontations, from tentative alliances to bitter betrayals, these interactions would lay the groundwork for centuries of conflict and coexistence. We'll also shine a light on the often overlooked role of African guides and interpreters, who played crucial roles in the trekkers' survival. These individuals straddled two worlds, navigating treacherous political and cultural landscapes with skill and often at great personal risk. As the night deepens and the Southern Cross tilts in the sky above us, we'll reflect on the legacy of the Great Trek. We'll consider how this pivotal period in South African history continues to shape national identity, political discourse, and social relationships in the modern era. This is not a comfortable history. It's a story of determination and desperation, of courage and cruelty, of faith tested to its limits and beyond. It's a reminder that the past is never truly past, that its echoes continue to shape our present and future. You are now under baobab skies, and as the first glimmers of dawn begin to paint the eastern horizon, our journey into the heart of the Voortrekker saga begins. Imagine it, a long ox wagon creaking across the dusty veldt, wheels groaning, oxen panting, men cracking whips just to keep the train moving. Behind them, families huddle in the wagons, holding children close, staring out at endless grass and thorn bush. Freedom was promised at the start of the journey, but most days it felt like freedom came packaged with hunger, fear, and a body that might not survive till morning. The Voortrekkers carried their lives on those wagons. Food, weapons, Bibles, a few pots and pans, maybe a chair if they could fit it. Yet every mile forward risked losing something. Axle wood snapped. Iron rims slipped off wheels. Oxen collapsed from thirst. To move was to bleed slowly, piece by piece, into the road. Disease haunted the trek. Simple fevers could steal a child overnight. Dysentery spread through groups that drank from dirty rivers. Smallpox and measles arrived with terrifying speed, sometimes wiping out entire families in a single outbreak. When you hear old tales of the Voortrekker spirit, remember, behind each pioneer victory was a grave dug shallow, often beside the road, with only a rough wooden cross to mark it. The constant threat of illness wasn't just a physical burden, it weighed on the mind, turning every cough into a potential death sentence, every headache into a family's nightmare. Mothers watched their children with hawk-like intensity, fear etched into the lines of their faces. Fathers pushed themselves to exhaustion, knowing that a moment's weakness could mean disaster for those who depended on them. Drought made everything worse. Weeks without rain meant the oxen grew thin, ribs pushing against their hides. Water barrels emptied too quickly, and streams ran dry. Families rationed sips, swallowing dust while praying for clouds. And if the rains did come, they often came in violent storms, thunder cracking across the sky, wagons tipping into mud, goods ruined by downpours. Either way, the weather was never a friend. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against the trekkers. Rocky outcrops tore at wagon wheels, hidden holes threatened to snap oxen legs, and thorny bushes snagged clothing and skin alike. Every hill became a mountain to climb, every river a potential grave for those who misjudged its current. The veldt, beautiful in its vastness, was also merciless in its indifference to human suffering. Skirmishes were another shadow. The Voortrekkers were moving into land already lived on, hunted on, farmed on, and defended. Tensions with African communities simmered constantly. A chance encounter on the veldt could mean an uneasy trade, or it could mean spears and gunfire. Men slept with muskets close, women with knives tucked under blankets. To be on the move was to never feel safe, never fully trust the next ridge. The constant vigilance wore on nerves, already frayed by hardship. Children learned to scan horizons before play. Women to listen for danger in every rustle of grass. The weight of weapons became as familiar as the weight of water buckets. A grim reminder that survival here meant more than just finding food and shelter. And yet they pushed forward. Why? because the Cape had grown suffocating British laws. Taxes, abolition of slavery, and the sense that their way of life was slipping away. They left not only for land, but for control, for identity, for the belief that God had set aside a place for them, even if it meant carving it out with blood and bone. This conviction drove them onward, but it also blinded them. The land they saw, as promised by divine right, was home to others, with their own deep-rooted claims and traditions. The Voortrekkers' dream of freedom often came at the cost of conflict, misunderstanding, and violence that would echo through generations. The daily grind wore away at more than just wagon wheels. It eroded hope, tested faith, and pushed families to breaking points. Arguments flared over dwindling supplies, over which direction to take, over whether to press on or turn back. Some did turn back, facing the shame of failure rather than another day of uncertainty. Those who continued often did so with gritted teeth and silent prayers. Nights brought little respite. As darkness fell, the veldt came alive with unfamiliar sounds, the roar of lions, the laugh of hyenas, the rustle of hoonaswat in the nearby bush. Fires were kept low to avoid attracting attention, leaving the wagons in pools of shadow. Sleep, when it came, was light and uneasy, broken by the need for watch rotations and the cries of restless children. Morning brought its own challenges. Bodies ached from sleeping on hard ground or cramped wagon beds. Breakfast was often meager, bit of dried meat, maybe some porridge if supplies allowed. Then came the ritual of hitching oxen, checking wheels, and setting out once more into the unforgiving day. The trek took its toll on relationships too. Marriages strained under the constant pressure, with some couples growing closer through shared hardship, while others drifted apart. Children grew up fast, taking on adult responsibilities out of necessity. The elderly, once respected pillars of the community, sometimes became burdens that families struggled to care for on the move. Yet, amidst the hardship, there were moments of beauty and connection. Hymns sung around evening fires, stories shared to pass long hours on the road, the breathtaking sight of a new landscape unfolding before weary eyes. These moments, fleeting as they were, helped sustain the spirit when bodies and minds were ready to give up. The Voortrekkers' journey was not just a physical one, but a spiritual and emotional odyssey. Each day tested not just their strength and skills, but their very beliefs about who they were and what they were meant to be. The promised land always seemed just over the next hill, just beyond the next river. A mirage that kept them moving, even as it remained frustratingly out of reach. This was the daily grind of a trekker. Wheels breaking, children sick, oxen stumbling, nights filled with fear. Every mile forward meant trading comfort for danger. The dream of freedom was always there, glimmering just out of reach. But the cost of chasing it was written in scars, in graves, in the constant sound of wagon wheels groaning against the earth. To be a Voortrekker on the move was to live in a state of constant tension between hope and despair. Hope for a better future, for land to call their own, for a place where they could live according to their beliefs. Despair at the seemingly endless challenges, the losses, both big and small. The nagging fear that perhaps they had made a terrible mistake in leaving the known for the unknown. The journey changed them in ways both visible and invisible. Skin toughened under the relentless sun, hands calloused from constant work. But the deeper changes were internal, a hardening of resolve, a sharpening of faith, or, for some, a questioning of everything they had once held dear. The veldt didn't just reshape the land, it reshaped the people who dared to cross it. As we look back on the Voortrekker experience, it's easy to romanticize their journey, to see it as a grand adventure or a heroic quest. But the reality was far grittier, far more painful. It was a gamble with the highest stakes, life itself, played out day after day under a sky that seemed indifferent to their struggles. You are now beginning to glimpse why being a Voortrekker on the move was not an adventure story, but a survival story. One that tested the very soul of those who dared to leave the Cape. It was a journey marked not by triumphant marches into new territory, but by the quiet, desperate courage of those who kept moving forward, one painful step at a time, in search of a dream that often seemed more mirage than reality. As we begin part 2 of our series, remember the struggle of the Boers is one that echoed through South Africa's history, shaping the nation we know today. Understanding their story helps us grasp modern South Africa better. So stick around to hear more. Now let's dive into the heart of the Voortrekker story. While we think of covered wagons and oxen, we might picture wide open spaces, perhaps a big sky and thundering herds. But what if I told you the trek was more like tiptoeing on eggshells? The Voortrekkers, pushing deeper into the interior, were constantly shadowed by enemies they could not always see. These enemies were not Zulu warriors with assegais, nor broken ox wagons creaking on the veldt, but fevers, famine, and skies that refused to rain. First up, there was the threat of disease. Now, you might imagine the African bush as empty, untouched, unsanitary, but that's not right. It was lived in by people who'd been here for ages. They had their homes and ways of life. The trekkers didn't just show up. They were entering a world that was already full of folks. And with them, there were diseases that the trekkers had never seen before. The biggest worry was malaria. Malaria, it was a constant shadow over the trek. In the low-lying bushveld, the air hung thick and heavy. And as the sun dipped low, a new menace buzzed into life. Mosquitoes, they weren't just annoying insects. They were carriers of a fever that could turn a person's insides to fire. Shivering, sweats, delirium and death, they lurked around every corner. Families huddled inside their wagons at night, their faces pale in the lamplight, listening to the moans of those taken by the fever. Whole families would wake drenched in sweat, their bodies trembling, their lips muttering prayers into the dark. For many, the trek ended not with the clash of war, but with the unseen poison of disease creeping through their blood. Their defense against this enemy was thin, their weapons useless. All they had were flimsy nets, and even those were more whole than fabric. If the Zulus could be fought with bullets, malaria was a whisper in the night, a thief that crept in when the moon was high. It was a fight without a face, a battle with an invisible foe. Next came hunger. You may have pictured the trek as a time of hearty meals, cooked over open fires, families sharing stories and laughter around a full table. But it wasn't like that, not really. The truth is, food was scarce, and every mouthful was hard-won. The ox wagons carried sacks of flour, strips of biltong and salted meat, but the loads were always too small for journeys that stretched months longer than planned. Sometimes the men ran out of bullets for hunting, or their guns misfired in the rain. Families turned to what little they could find: roasted locusts, wild roots, or thin porridge stretched for 10 mouths. Children went to bed crying, dreaming of empty plates, their stomachs rumbling like distant thunder. Some grew so gaunt their ribs poked through their skin like a rosary of pain. Fathers chewed leather straps to trick their bodies into forgetting the emptiness. It wasn't easy, and then came drought. The trek was not just a journey through the wilderness, it was a gamble with the land itself. The veldt could be unforgiving in its silence. No rain meant no grazing, and no grazing meant oxen falling down in their yokes, tongues swollen, eyes rolling back. Without the oxen, The wagons themselves, their lifelines carrying everything they owned, stood abandoned in the dust. The trekkers' dream of freedom froze in place. A wagon stuck between parched earth and endless sky, but the drought didn't just take away what they had. It pushed them to do things they never thought they'd have to. Some prayed in Afrikaans hymns, their voices rising at dawn, a plea to a god who seemed deaf to their cries. Others traded rifles or cloth with the African communities they'd barely known for calabashes of milk or handfuls of sorghum. It wasn't just about survival. It was about pleading with the land itself, with neighbors who knew it better, hoping for mercy in a world where none was owed. Yet even the Trek's heroes, the oxen, started to fail them. Oxen are tough, strong, steady. They're supposed to be the backbone of the Trek, right? Wrong. The Voortrekkers pushed them to the limit, and sometimes the oxen couldn't take it anymore. The trekkers had never seen anything like this before. This endless, dry spell, the veldt that once teemed with life, now cracked and baked under the relentless sun. The waterholes they depended on turned to dusty pans, the grass withered, and the oxen suffered. At first, it was subtle. A lost calf here, a tired mother struggling to rise. Then it got worse. The drought dragged on, turning the trek into a race against despair. The oxen, they weren't just losing weight, they were losing hope. Their ribs showed through their hides like a roadmap of their suffering. Their tongues swelled, making it hard to eat and drink. And when they drank, the water turned their eyes cloudy, their legs shaky. Watching them suffer was the worst. It was like seeing your lifeline break. One by one, the Trek's heroes fell, collapsing in their yokes, their strength spent, their bodies giving up. The trekkers couldn't save them. All they could do was watch and grieve, because the drought wasn't just taking their cattle, it was taking their future, their very survival. Imagine being on the trek. You've left everything you know behind, braved dangers that seemed endless, and all you can think about is your next meal. You look at your oxen, their ribs showing, their eyes dull, and you know you're in trouble. You try talking to them, telling them it'll get better, but even you don't believe the words. You see your children growing thinner, their bellies making your old heart hurt. You hunt and pray, but the prey stays out of reach, and your prayers seem to vanish in the hot air. Then the well runs dry, and your oxen start to fall. You're stuck in a web of dust and despair, and the only sound is the wind mocking you with its emptiness. That's what it was like for the trekkers during the drought. A fight not against an army, but against nature itself. It was not just the physical toll of hunger, thirst, and disease. It was also a blow to the spirit. Think about it. You've left home because you want freedom, a better life. But when all you see is dust, when all you taste is hunger, when all you hear is your own misery, that freedom starts to feel like a prison. They were supposed to be building a new life, not clinging to scraps of the old one. The drought wasn't just a test of their endurance, it was a challenge to their beliefs. Could God really let them suffer like this? Was this the promised land they'd heard about? Or were they just dying of thirst in a forgotten corner of the world? What made their suffering crueler was that it was endured in silence. There were no newspapers to record the cries of a dying Trekkar child, no doctors to write down their fevers. Their misery vanished into the dust behind them, remembered only in the whispered stories of survivors. To be a Boer trekker was not just to walk into danger, but to walk into hunger, sickness, and the mocking silence of the sky. So, as we wrap up this episode, remember this. The trek wasn't just a story of covered wagons and oxen. It was a story of human endurance in the face of hunger, disease, and a relentless landscape. It was a trek that tested not just their courage, but their will to survive. And hey, thanks for joining us on this journey through time. If you liked this episode, hit that like button and subscribe for more. We've got more stories waiting for you. If the ox wagon breaking down tested patience and the drought tested faith, then skirmishes tested the soul. The trekkers had entered a land that was not empty. Each valley, riverbank, and plateau already belonged to someone. People with their own cattle, their own gods, their own bloodline stories that stretched back further than any European map. To move forward meant trespassing, and trespass rarely came without consequence. By the end of the trek season, stories travelled like fire down the wagon line. Of wagons attacked under moonlight, of cattle driven off into the hills by strangers, of gunfire exchanged across thorn hedges. It was not always warriors from great kingdoms that tested them. Sometimes it was smaller bands, desperate men, a mix of dispossessed locals, escaped slaves, or even rival trekker groups with grudges, fighting over grazing and river crossings. It was in these encounters that the true cost of the trek began to reveal itself, etched onto faces young and old. Children grew up learning the crack of a musket. Before they knew how to read a prayer book, mothers stitched bandages beside pots of maize porridge. Fathers spoke in low tones about ambushes and betrayal. Nights were no longer quiet. Every rustle in the tall grass became the whisper of an enemy. And yet, despite the constant fear, life went on. The seasons turned and the wagons moved forward. But something had been irrevocably broken. The peace of the open road was gone. In its place, a deep, abiding dread. Skirmishes became the norm, testing the limits of the trekkers' resolve. Some sought to avoid confrontation entirely, sending out advance parties to scout river crossings or burying their valuables to hide them from potential raiders. Others, mostly the younger men, yearned for action. They wanted to defend their families and claim the spoils of victory. Many fell somewhere between these two extremes, hardening their hearts and turning their backs on the world as a way of surviving. And through it all, the children listened, watched, and learned. They heard tales of bravery and death, of cunning and cowardice. They saw their parents transform, harden, or break. And they learned that on this frontier, survival depended on shedding innocence. They learned how to hold a gun before they could shave, how to track a wounded ox before they could read a hunter's trail. They learned the harsh language of the Endebel and the Satho, the Zulu battle cry and the Xhosa war dance. In many ways, they became little adults, thrust into the heart of a brutal world long before they should have been ready for it. This was their new reality, and though it was far from the freedom promised by the British, it was the only one they knew. Most treks tried to keep moving, hoping to outrun the troubles that plagued them. But sometimes circumstances forced them to stand and fight. When a large band of Nibel warriors descended on a lone trekker's camp, killing his wife and children and stealing their possessions, a grizzled veteran named Jacobus Swart took matters into his own hands. With a handful of allies, he tracked the Endebel to their stronghold and led a daring nighttime attack, burning huts and filling the air with the stench of burning flesh. News of his exploits spread and inspired others. Soon, isolated incidents of violence began to form a pattern. The trekkers were no longer just a column of slow-moving wagons. They were a threat that had to be dealt with. At first, it was small, harassing attacks. Then came the pitched battles, followed by full-scale assaults, and with each engagement, the stakes grew higher. Entire families were wiped out. Whole treks were pushed back toward the coast. Men, women, and children died from gunshot wounds, assegais, and the diseases that followed in the wake of battle. Some treks broke apart rather than face certain death. Others held fast, determined to fight to the last man. But even those who won battles paid a heavy price. Homes were destroyed, cattle were stolen, and the living were forever marked by what they had seen and done. Amidst this chaos, rumors spread like wildfire. Tales of entire treks annihilated, of villages razed to the ground, of entire communities wiped out. Fear became a constant companion, whispering in the wind, rustling in the leaves, haunting their dreams. Then there was the aftermath. The survivors were left picking through the wreckage of their lives, burying their dead and mourning what they had lost. The killings didn't end with the battles. Sometimes, when a trek was strong enough to continue, they found their path blocked by a battlefield. Every step was a risk. Every footprint could be a trap. Sometimes a clever enemy would feign retreat, leaving behind a few bodies and a trail of blood, hoping to lure the trekkers into a deadly ambush. Even when there was no immediate threat, danger lurked around every bend. The trekkers couldn't tell if the river they needed to cross had been poisoned, if the cattle they found grazing were a hunter's prize, or if the friendly faces they encountered were friend or foe. It was a cruel lesson to learn, but the children learned it well. They saw their parents transform, harden or break. They saw the casual brutality of frontier life and the calculated cruelty of a people pushed to the edge. They learned that the concept of neutrality was an illusion, and that the only constant on this frontier was change. In the midst of all this, the trekkers clung to the hope of reaching a place where they could finally put down roots. Somewhere beyond the mountains and valleys lay a piece of land where they could build a home without fear of attack, a place where the soil was theirs for the taking. But even that hope began to fade as the years passed and the killings continued. The land they dreamed of owning seemed cursed. Every time they neared it, disaster struck. Wagons were destroyed, families were taken, and the bones of their hopes and dreams littered the ground. Each new sunrise brought fresh horrors, and the trekkers grew weary. Their once vibrant community was now a shadow of its former self, fractured by fear and suspicion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ravaged landscape, the trekkers huddled around their flickering campfires, sharing stories of loss and trying to make sense of their fate. They spoke of brave deeds and valiant efforts, but their voices were hushed and their eyes downcast. They knew that in this unforgiving land, courage alone could not protect them. They were trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Yet, even in the darkest moments, a flicker of defiance remained. The trekkers refused to surrender their dream of a better life. They would endure the hardships of the journey, the attacks of their enemies, and the whispers of fear. They would carry on, scarred but unbroken, until their dying breath. For them, the trek was more than just a journey. It was a testament to their indomitable spirit, a journey to freedom, a journey to the unknown. When the weary wagons of the Voortrekkers finally reached the rolling hills of what we today call Natal, their eyes lit up. Here was a land of green valleys, wide rivers, and soil that promised abundance. But there was a truth no trekker could ignore. This was not empty land waiting for them. It was the heartland of the mighty Zulu kingdom, and its throne was occupied by King Dingaan Afrikanner, brother to the legendary Shaka. Now, you may already know this story. You may already know that Retief would ultimately betray Dingaan, leading a Zulu-hating mob in a massacre that left thousands dead. But you probably don't know why. Because the story of Ruda and Dingaan is a lot more complicated than some simple bloodlust. And now, back to our story. By the end of this part, you'll understand why Retief's mission to Dingaan began not with conquest, but with careful negotiation. Before we get into it, if you love stories like this, please consider giving us a thumbs up. It helps us keep going. Also, Stick around after this episode for a special announcement. Tall and diplomatic, Retief was chosen as the face of the trekkers. He rode forward with letters written in stiff Dutch script, proposing peace, proposing order, proposing what the wagons so desperately needed, grazing lands to call their own. His manner was calm, but beneath his hat brim, he knew the risk. One wrong word and the Zulu regiments could sweep down and trample the trekker dream in a single afternoon. Retief had good reason for concern. The Zulus were formidable fighters, organized into large military units called regiments, each one comprising several thousand men. They fought with short stabbing spears and long throwing spears, and used a tactic called the buffalo horn, which involved encircling their enemies and overwhelming them from two directions, leaving only one path to safety, which they guarded with a third column of soldiers. The trekkers, meanwhile, were a ragtag bunch of farmers and tradesmen whose military experience amounted to hunting down Kosa boys and putting down the occasional commando raid. Nevertheless, they had one powerful weapon on their side: gunpowder. A few well-aimed musket shots could sow chaos among the Zulu ranks, and Retief planned to use that fact to his advantage. He wanted Dingaan to voluntarily grant them land. To do that, he had to convince the king that they were dangerous allies and not just defenseless prey. But how? Simple, through marriage. Retief brought with him two young women named Anna and Maria Katharina Kruger, whose hands he would one day force into Dingaan's, that is, if he could actually get them to meet. Dingaan, notoriously leery of foreigners, avoided most embassies and correspondence, instead preferring to send out his own emissaries to gather intelligence on the newcomers. Retief, keen not to appear too eager, played hardball. When Dingaan's messengers arrived asking for tribute and submission, Retief insulted them, chiding them for coming so far only to receive nothing but a refusal. He told them to tell Dingaan that he would only bow to a king who came to his camp. Dingaan received Retief at the royal homestead of Omgungunlovu. It was a scene of grandeur and tension. Long rows of warriors, spears gleaming in the sunlight, encircling the space with silent authority. Dingaan, robed in leopard skins, sat with the weight of a king who had inherited both power and enemies. The Zulu court was a stage. Every movement, every silence, every song of the warriors watching was meant to remind Retief, "You are a guest here, and guests leave by the will of the king." Retief bowed slightly, and his interpreter spoke of friendship, of shared futures, of land that could be freely given without bloodshed. For a moment, the king listened. He heard the words, measured their weight, and let silence fill the air. The trekkers dreamed of land. Dingaan, however, weighed more than land. He weighed the memory of his brother Shaka's empire, the threat of guns in white hands, and the possibility of harnessing these new arrivals against his enemies. He could destroy the trekkers now. He could snuff out their settlement and claim their fertile lands for himself. In fact, he had good reason to do so. Just months earlier, he had barely escaped an ambush by a rival tribe armed with muskets. Guns, he knew, could devastate his warriors. But even though his brother Shaka had been murdered by his own half-sister, Nundi, and her lover, Dingaan, was wary of losing his crown to ambitious rivals. He knew he wasn't yet strong enough to wage war on the trekkers. Not only were they armed with guns, they also possessed something far more valuable: knowledge. As the days passed, Retief found himself held captive in the very palace he was trying to break into. Dingaan kept him close, speaking to him in private and showering him with gifts. He encouraged him to teach his son military tactics and European technology. All the while, his counselors urged him to destroy the foreigners who had invaded his country. Yet Dingaan hesitated. As the weeks wore on, he began to see the potential value of the trekkers. While his warriors fought with spears and shields, Retief and his men knew how to build fortifications and use firearms. And unlike Dingaan, who ruled over a fractured Zulu kingdom, Retief represented a united front, a group of people whose loyalty to their leader was unshakable. It was during this time that Dingaan wrestled with the decision that would shape his future and the future of his people. His advisors argued for speed, for seizing the trekker wagons and forcing them to flee into the interior of South Africa, where they could be picked off one by one. Others urged caution, pointing out the dangers of the trekkers' weapons. Dingaan listened to both sides and made up his mind. He would play a waiting game, a test of patience and endurance. He would wait until the trekkers grew impatient and tried to force their way into the fertile lands of the Zulu kingdom. Only then would he strike. Meanwhile, he would feign hospitality and gain their trust. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. For the trekkers, patience was wearing thin. Their supplies were dwindling, and they yearned to graze their cattle in the rich pastures of the Natal Valley. For Dingaan, the cost of appeasement was high, but the potential rewards were even greater. If he could successfully court the trekkers and learn their ways, he might have a chance to turn the tide against his enemies. And so the drama unfolded in the Zulu court. Dingaan feigned friendliness while his spies shadowed the trekkers, reporting back to him on their activities. The stage was set for a showdown that would change the course of South African history. This first meeting was not yet betrayal, not yet tragedy. It was the promise, and like all promises, it glowed with fragile hope. The trek wagons arrive at the Zulu King's kraal in the late afternoon. Hunger and hope cling to the trekkers like a second skin, but they brought something else as well. Something that carried the weight of generations past. Parchment, pence, and the belief that law could bind men together more tightly than fear. For when the wagons rumbled to a halt outside the Great King's enclosure, the Voortrekkers were ready. They would show Dingaan the strength of the white man, not in guns or conquest, but in the binding power of the written word. After their first audience with the Zulu monarch, Retief had returned to camp with his men carrying papers drafted in Dutch script, translated into English and spoken aloud for clarity. This time, he would show Dingaan the power of words. The Voortrekker leader held out a hand toward the king. Beside him, 2 oxen were slaughtered and their hides draped over the wagon, creating a rough shelter for the signing. On the ground before them, blankets were spread to catch the blood of sacrifice and absorb the weight of what was about to happen. In front of the trekkers, a fire crackled merrily, casting flickering shadows that danced to the beat of the Zulu drums. On the other side of the fire sat the Zulu king, his body swathed in leopard skin, his face impassive, his eyes like chips of flint. Around him sat the Indunas, senior advisors, who were watching the white men with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Before them lay the treaty, the agreement that would grant the Voortrekkers the land of Natal, stretching to the Tugela and beyond. But for Dingaan, the paper itself was of little importance. He knew full well that the true performance lay elsewhere, in the offerings of the Voortrekkers, in their words, in their actions, and most importantly, in the cattle. Cattle were wealth, power, and lifeblood. To offer them was not merely generosity. It was an acknowledgement that the giver understood the rhythm of African kingship. The Voortrekkers had come to trade, to share, to become friends with the Zulu king. And so they had brought gifts, bottles of Cape wine to soften the mood, token shields and spears to show that they had come in peace. But most importantly, they had brought cattle, lots of cattle, enough to show respect without emptying their herds. When Dingaan accepted these gifts, the Indunas murmured among themselves. In Zulu tradition, To accept cattle was to accept relationship. But what kind of relationship was being forged here? The trekkers thought in terms of deeds and signatures. The Zulu thought in terms of loyalty, tribute, and obedience. Each side translated the act into its own language of power. Riti flayed the treaty out on the hide, carefully smoothed it with his hand, and spoke through interpreters. All the land of Natal, stretching to the Tugela and beyond, was to be granted to the Voortrekkers in friendship and peace. His own mark, a cross, guided by foreign hands, was placed upon it. The trekkers believed this was victory. They sang hymns under their breath, praising God for this moment, for the safety of their families, for the birth of a new nation. And yet, beneath the heavy folds of Dingin's leopard skin cloak, his eyes told another story. To him, the act of signing meant little. It was the cattle, the feasting, the submission of guests that spoke volumes. The ink on the page might have satisfied the trekkers, but in the Zulu world, only continued loyalty could seal a covenant. Wine was poured. Songs rose, and for a moment the kraal echoed with the sound of shared celebration. Yet even as cups clinked, misunderstandings hardened into fate. There was no way to know it in the flickering firelight, but the die had been cast. The moment the trekkers set foot inside the Zulu king's kraal, they had entered a world where hospitality was a battlefield, and every gesture, every gift, every word was a weapon. They celebrated too easily, said too much, gave too freely, trusted too young. But how could they have known that Dingan Escort was a place where the rules of engagement were unwritten, where perceptions were as deadly as spears, where deception lurked beneath every smile? As darkness fell over Umgungundlovu, long shadows stretched across the ground, twisting the shapes of the dancing warriors. Laughter rang out, mingling with the thudding drums, with the clash of spears and the hypnotic drone of the umlondo. The Zulu men danced, their bodies swaying in unison, their voices chanting praises to their king. Some danced with shields held high above their heads. Others lunged and twisted like striking snakes, their movements sharp and quick. But all moved in step, a single organism expressing the will of the chief. Across the fire, the white settlers drank and wrote, sealing their friendships with broad grins and the scratch of a pen. They sang songs of their homeland, of the struggles and triumphs of their people, their voices carrying on the night air, a testament to their courage, their faith, their determination. Some prayed, others wrote letters to loved ones left behind, sharing stories of the day, of the treaty signed, the future bright. Two worlds met that night, brought together by the flicker of firelight, linked by the clink of glasses, the crash of dance steps, the rustle of paper, yet seeing different meanings in the same events. As the night wore on, the lines between cultures blurred. Laughter bridged the divides, and for a fleeting moment, the future seemed limitless. But dawn would bring hard edges again, the boundaries of custom, the weight of misunderstanding, the shadow of mistrust, and somewhere between the firelight and sunrise, the fragile fabric of trust unraveled. With the morning light came a new clarity, a harsh spotlight that stripped away the illusions of the night before. As the settlers awoke, stretching and yawning, their minds still heavy with the remnants of celebration, they noticed small details, tiny slights, careless words from the night before that now seemed loaded with meaning. One of the Voortrekker women stood by the dying fire, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She pointed to the ground, her voice shaking. "Look," she whispered, "they have taken our boundary stones." Her companions rushed to her side, their faces etched with alarm. Sure enough, the stones that marked their temporary borders were gone, vanished without a trace. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, anxiety tightened its grip on the settlement. Whispers turned to shouts, unease to accusation. The settlers, fueled by fear and adrenaline, began searching for the missing markers, their eyes scanning the ground, their hands shaking. On the Zulu side of the fire, Dingaan watched impassively. He had known this moment might come, had anticipated the reaction of the trekkers, but he had also hoped for a better outcome, a meeting of minds, a merging of cultures. Instead, he saw only fear and anger. One of the Indunas approached the Zulu king, his voice low, his eyes filled with concern. "Great king," he said, "the white men are in turmoil. Their fear is palpable. What shall we do?" Dingaan considered this, his gaze distant, his mind calculating. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Let them search," he said, "let them find nothing. We have made our point." The missing boundary stones became a symbol, a tangible representation of the growing divide between the two cultures. As the settlers failed to find the markers, their frustration grew. Some demanded action, retaliation. Others pleaded for patience, for a chance to explain. The treaty, once a beacon of hope, now seemed like a distant memory. The ink on the pages, a mockery of the reality on the ground. As tempers flared and accusations flew, the possibility of a peaceful coexistence faded. Dingaan watched it all unfold, a mixture of sadness and resolve on his face. He had hoped for a different outcome, but now he knew that the path forward was clear. The trekkers had shown their true colors, their greed, their paranoia, their willingness to exploit. He had made the right decision, he told himself, in keeping the boundary stones hidden. It was a test, a final test of wills, and the settlers had failed. With each passing moment, the chasm between the two cultures grew wider, the chances of reconciliation slimmer. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the kraal, Dingaan knew that the time had come to say goodbye. It was not the end he had wanted, but it was the end he had prepared for. We left off with Piet Retief and his party having made good progress across the interior of South Africa. Now they are approaching the court of Zulu King Dingaan, whom they hope to negotiate a peace treaty and land grant with. However, there was bad blood between the Zulus and the Boers even before the trekkers arrived. Retief and his men would walk into a deadly trap laid out for them by Dingaan. On a warm February morning in 1838, Retief and more than 60 of his companions were invited to Umgungundlovu, Dingaan's royal homestead. The trek leader accepted the invitation, which in itself was a bold move, because it meant leaving the security of their camp and weapons behind. They left their rifles outside the palisade surrounding the Zulu royal compound. It was customary for guests to disarm before entering the king's court, and the Zulus expected no less from the Boers. Upon arrival, they were greeted by the sight of thousands of Zulu warriors dressed in their ceremonial finest, strutting around the massive cattle byres and royal huts. A delegation of chiefs stood waiting to escort them to Dingaan, and when the king appeared, he received them with warmth, showering them with praise and offering them beer. However, there was something inexplicably unsettling about the setup. Dingaan kept gesturing toward a large open space with a dense wood line at its far edge. He seemed eager to direct the Boers to it, and they couldn't help but notice the array of spears standing upright against the wall of a nearby hut. It looked like a row of sharpened teeth ready to sink into unsuspecting prey. But the trekkers chose to ignore these unsettling details, hoping for a peaceful resolution. As a sign of goodwill, the Zulus offered them a feast, and the two groups celebrated well into the afternoon with dancing and singing. The Boers were exhausted from months of hardship and uncertainty. They were desperate for an end to their troubles, and this seemingly friendly gathering offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps they had finally found a respite from their troubled trek. Then, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the homestead, Dingaan made an announcement that sent a chill down the spines of the trekkers. He declared that his warriors would perform a ceremony called the Balala, a Zulu term for killing the wizard. In their ritual dances, the Zulus personified evil as an old, lame, or blind man. So by singling out someone for the Balala, it meant they were declaring that person an enemy to be vanquished. When the dancers approached the Boer delegation, they sang a song mockingly describing how they would kill the old, blind, and lame. And then one of them raised his knobkerrie high and brought it down hard on an old blind man's head. The poor old man fell to the ground, writhing in pain as the other dancers closed in, beating him mercilessly. The rest of the trekkers could only stand by helplessly, watching in horror as the so-called blind man struggled to protect himself. Suddenly, realizing the grim reality of their situation, the trekkers cried out to Dingaan for mercy, begging him to intervene. But the Zulu king remained seated, unmoved by their pleas. To make matters worse, the dancer portraying the lame man stumbled backward into the Boer delegation, accidentally poking one of them in the eye with his assegai. The Boer retaliated instinctively, slashing at the dancer with his knife, and in doing so broke the sacred rule of not shedding blood within the royal enclosure. A hush fell over the crowd. The Zulu warriors froze mid-dance, their eyes narrowing dangerously, and all eyes turned to Dingaan, waiting for his response. When he spoke, his voice boomed with authority and finality. "Bulalani abatakati, kill the wizard." The command echoed through the stunned silence, and the next few moments were pure pandemonium. Rushing forward, the warriors closed in on the helpless Boers, who now realized the gravity of their mistake. The peaceful meeting they had entered with such hope had been nothing but a cunning ruse. As the attackers closed in, some trekkers fought back, swinging their knives wildly, but against the ferocity of the Zulus, it was a losing battle. In the ensuing chaos, the Boers were overwhelmed and forced to flee. Many were injured or captured, but most managed to scramble over the palisade and run for safety. The incident soon escalated into a full-scale attack, and the trekkers found themselves in a desperate fight for survival. It was a brutal affair, and the trekkers suffered heavy losses. Some were killed, others wounded, and many were forced to flee, abandoning their possessions. The scene at the king's homestead turned into a chaotic nightmare. The ambush at Dingaan's court resulted in a terrible loss of life. Most of the trekkers managed to escape, but many did not survive the ordeal. When the dust settled and the attackers had disappeared, the trekkers began to count the cost. Of the 64 men who had entered Dingaan's court, 49 were killed, including several women and children. Those who survived were traumatized and shaken to their core. The attack had been swift and brutal, and they had come perilously close to annihilation. But miraculously, Retief survived the attack, managing to escape with his life. Although he had lost many of his companions and allies, he was determined to regroup and strike back. Realizing that the Zulus had shown no mercy, he knew that the only option left was revenge. As word of the massacre spread among the trekkers, it ignited a firestorm of grief and vengeance. The attack on Dingaan's court was seen as a grave injustice, and the trekkers were united in their desire for retribution. The sense of betrayal was particularly acute. The trekkers had approached the Zulu king in good faith, seeking peaceful coexistence and a mutually beneficial land agreement. But Dingaan had betrayed their trust, unleashing a vicious and unprovoked attack that left dozens dead or missing. The aftermath of the massacre was a pivotal moment in the history of the trekkers. The attack had been so traumatic that it galvanized the community, forging a sense of unity and determination among them. The trekkers were now more than ever before driven by a single purpose: to seek revenge and protect their families and communities from further harm. To add to their resolve, many survivors believed that the attack was divinely ordained, a test of their faith and resilience. They saw it as their duty to stand up against tyranny and oppression, not just for themselves, but for future generations of trekkers. The desire for justice was palpable. The trekkers felt compelled to defend themselves and their way of life against those who sought to destroy it. The massacre at Dingaan's Court was not just a tragic event, but a catalyst for action. It transformed the trekkers, turning them into a force to be reckoned with. In the aftermath, the trekkers were filled with a fierce determination to protect their communities and avenge those who had been lost. This spirit of resilience and determination would play a crucial role in their future encounters with the Zulus, culminating in the historic Battle of Blood River. Today, the site of the massacre is commemorated at the monument to the Boer trekkers at Kwamatiwane, near the R66 road between Ladysmith and Winter. The monument serves as a reminder of the tragic events that unfolded there, and pays tribute to the pioneers who lost their lives. It stands as a solemn reminder of the cost of progress and the importance of understanding and respecting different cultures. And so, the massacre at Dingaan's Court remains a significant event in South African history, a dark chapter marked by betrayal and bloodshed. It is a tale of broken trust and the lengths to which power and fear can drive a ruler. The story serves as a reminder of the complexities of the past and the need for empathy and understanding in bridging the divides of history. In the heart of Africa, there's a place called Mapungubwe, a forgotten kingdom whispered about in hushed tones. It was a place where ancient rulers forged their power with trade and diplomacy. They created a realm where cultures intertwined and wealth flowed like water. And then, just as quickly, it vanished. But the stories of Mapungubwe endured, passed down through generations until they became part of an oral tradition. Then, in the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered its secrets, revealing a world that challenged everything they thought they knew about ancient Africa. Welcome to our channel. Today, let's uncover the mysteries of Mapungubwe. Our journey begins in the northern province of Limpopo in South Africa. Imagine vast grasslands dotted with thorn trees and baobabs stretching as far as the eye can see. And in the distance, something catches your eye. It's a small hill made of reddish sandstone. Ordinary, maybe from afar. But as you get closer, you start to notice strange things. There are caves carved into the hillside and rows of flat terraces built with such precision that they look like pieces of a giant puzzle. Each terrace is about 3 meters wide and separated by shallow channels that resemble miniature dams. Together, they form a network that covers a whopping 60 hectares of the hill. But why? Well, that's where the story of Mapungubwe truly begins. The name Mapungubwe means the hill of the jackal. In the local language, Sanga, and when the locals talk about it, their voices take on a different tone. They tell stories of a powerful kingdom that once thrived on this very hill. Now, before we continue, let me ask you a question. What comes to mind when you hear the word empire? Do you think of mighty armies, towering statues, or sprawling palaces? Well, how about defensive walls? In fact, many empires throughout history used walls as a way to protect their people and their land. The Great Wall of China is probably the most famous example. But did you know that other empires also built remarkable walls? For instance, the Roman Empire built Hadrian's Wall across Britain. Meanwhile, in the heart of Africa, somewhere along the Limpopo River, a group of people constructed their own wall. This wasn't a wall made of stone, though. It was a living wall woven by King Mafeto and his son, the legendary King Thobijane. They rallied together hundreds of villagers and used clay and grass to create a barrier that stretched for miles. It was so tall that even elephants couldn't push it over. This wasn't just a defense against invaders, it was a declaration of independence. You see, these kingdoms weren't like those back in Europe. They valued trade and diplomacy over war. When Mafeto's son took the throne, he continued his father's legacy, expanding the kingdom and keeping it safe. But after him, things got a bit shaky. His brother wanted the throne, and this led to years of fighting. After King Sabhuza I's death, his son, King Thobane, took over. He tried to bring everyone together, saying that God had sent him to unite the people. For a while, it seemed like peace would last. But soon, there was trouble again. A neighboring king had dreams of taking over Mepanubwe, and only King Thobijane stood in his way. So, King Thobijane assembled his warriors and prepared for battle. However, his army wasn't ready. Many of them didn't even have proper weapons. Despite this, they managed to hold off the attackers, but in the end, they had to escape. Fast forward a few years, and there's a new leader in town, King Maclubber. He sets his sights on uniting the region under the banner of Mapundu. To make this dream a reality, he needs a strong base, so he chooses the Hill of the Jackal. But why? Well, it turns out the hill is a natural fortress. Getting to the top is no easy feat. You'd have to climb up steep cliffs and cross over a narrow ridge. Plus, there are caves on the hill that can hide up to 3,000 people. It's like having a secret weapon. But there's a catch. The area around Mapungubwe is full of wild animals like lions, leopards, and buffaloes. Building a settlement there is kind of like inviting danger to your doorstep. Nonetheless, King Makadisho takes up the challenge and orders the construction of houses on the hill. But wait, don't go thinking he does all the work himself. No sir, he calls on the best builders from nearby towns to help him out. Together, they lay the foundation for the city. However, life on the hill isn't exactly a piece of cake. There aren't many trees to keep the people safe from wild animals, and getting water is quite a mission. Undeterred, the people adapt. They use their skills to build round houses with thick walls made of stone and clay, and they dig deep wells to find water. Inside these homes, they keep their precious belongings in clay pots and chests made from animal skins. But these humble dwellings are not just shelters. They're symbols of human resilience and creativity. The people of Mapanubwe turn challenges into opportunities. For instance, the lack of wood doesn't stop them from cooking their meals. Instead, they gather wood from the nearby bush and construct clay stoves to cook their food. They also use their surroundings to defend themselves, setting traps for dangerous animals and using natural barriers for protection. Their ingenuity extends to farming as well. Although there's no fertile land on the hill, the people of Mapungubwe don't despair. They travel to the surrounding areas to plant crops and raise livestock. This way, they have food to eat and extra supplies to trade with other communities. As time passes, the settlement on the Hill of the Jackal flourishes. It becomes a hub of activity, buzzing with people going about their daily lives. The streets come alive with merchants selling their wares, children playing games, and families gathering for ceremonies. Life here is not just about surviving, it's about thriving. However, despite the bustling life in the city, there's a looming danger that no one can ignore. The neighboring king is amassing an army with the sole purpose of destroying Mapa. He sends messengers threatening to unleash his wrath unless the people abandon their hilltop settlement. But the ruler of Mapungubwe refuses to back down. He knows that his people have built this city from scratch. and he woe and let it fall without a fight. Now, when you hear the phrase great empire, what do you imagine? Vast palaces, majestic monuments, or maybe powerful armies? But what if I told you that some empires rose to prominence due to the simple yet effective use of metal? It might sound surprising, but it's true. Take the kingdom of Mapunjub, for example. They may not have had towering structures or large armies, but they excelled in working with metals. Their skill was especially evident in the creation of ornaments and accessories crafted from precious metals like gold and silver. Now, if you want to learn more about the fascinating world of ancient craftsmanship, stay tuned. After the credits, we've got a treat for you. Back to the story. The ruler of Mepanubu was well aware of his kingdom's vulnerability. Unlike his neighbors, he didn't have a large army to protect his people or enough resources to sustain them in case of a siege. So, what was his secret weapon? Diplomacy. He reached out to the Queen of Zimbabwe, asking for her daughter's hand in marriage. But it wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a strategic move to forge an alliance. By forming this bond, he hoped to ensure the safety of Mapungubu and secure his people's future. Soon, wedding bells were ringing and the two kingdoms were united. The Queen's son became the ruler of Mapundu, marking the beginning of a new chapter in its history. But this union came with challenges. The Queen's advisors were wary of the alliance and didn't trust the ruler of Mapundu. They constantly pressured her son to return home, sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust between the two kingdoms. Nevertheless, the ruler of Mapungubi remained steadfast in his commitment to protecting his people. Even when faced with the threat of war, he refused to bend. As the neighboring king prepared for battle, tensions rose, casting a shadow of uncertainty over the fate of Mapungubu. Will the ruler's diplomatic efforts be enough to save his people? Or will Mapundubu crumble under the weight of its enemies? Only time will tell. Meanwhile, archaeological excavations have revealed a series of rings that played a significant role in Mapungubu's economy and cultural exchange. These rings are more than just historical artifacts. They offer a window into the complex social dynamics and trading networks of ancient Africa. The year is 1930, and two prospectors named Jacob and Godfrey are out looking for gold in South Africa. Little did they know that they were about to stumble upon something extraordinary. During their search, they discovered a small golden ornament that turned out to be a tiny golden rhino. It was perfectly crafted and no bigger than a man's hand. The discovery of the golden rhino sparked a flurry of excitement among archaeologists and historians. It shattered long-held beliefs about ancient Africa, proving that the region had been home to advanced civilizations capable of producing exquisite works of art. Over the years, more artifacts like miniature rhino heads, bracelets, beads, and other ornaments have been found in the area. These treasures painted a vivid picture of a sophisticated society with a deep understanding of trade and cultural exchange. As you know, history can be divided into different periods of time, and in this segment, we're looking at the Iron Age in southern Africa. The Iron Age is significant because it marks a period when societies in Africa began using iron tools and weapons. And we're going to see how the kingdom of Mepanubu was a key player in this period. But remember that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about understanding how people lived and how their decisions and actions have shaped the world we live in today. The Iron Age in southern Africa lasted from around 400 AD to 1600 AD. During this period, societies in the region began to use iron tools and weapons, which allowed them to do things that they could undo before. They could clear more land for farming, hunt more effectively, and defend themselves against invaders. The kingdom of Mapungubwe was located in what is now South Africa, and it was one of the largest and most powerful states in the region during the Iron Age. The kingdom was known for its wealth and its advanced society, and it played a major role in the trade networks that connected the region. Okay, now let's dive into the details. Let's start with the topic of this segment, the golden rhino. The golden rhino is a small statue made of gold that was found in a royal burial mound at the site of Mapungubwe. It is about 8 centimeters tall and weighs 7 kilograms, and it is thought to have been made around the year 1300. The rhino is not just a piece of art, it's a symbol of power and authority. It represents the strength and resilience of the kingdom and its ruler. So why a rhino? Well, in African cultures, animals often have special meanings, and the rhino was seen as a symbol of power and protection. Its thick skin symbolized strength, and its solitary nature showed independence and self-reliance. Now, let's talk about how the rhino was made. The craftsmen who made the rhino were highly skilled, and the process took a lot of time and care. First, thin sheets of gold were hammered out and then carefully folded and shaped to create the rhino's body. The pieces were then soldered together and the surface was polished to create a smooth and shiny finish. But why a rhino, and why gold? Well, gold was the most valuable metal in the kingdom and was often used to represent wealth and power. The choice of animal also had special meaning. As we mentioned earlier, the rhino was a symbol of strength and power and was often associated with royalty. Putting these two things together created a powerful image that conveyed the wealth and authority of the kingdom and its ruler. The golden rhino was discovered in 1933 during excavations at the site of Mapungubwe. It was found in a royal burial mound along with other valuable items, such as glass beads and ceramic pots. The discovery of the rhino was a major event in the history of archaeology in South Africa. It was the first piece of gold jewelry to be found in the country, and it provided important insights into the wealth and sophistication of the Mapungubwe civilization. The golden rhino was probably used as a symbol of power and authority. It may have been placed in the tomb of a king or chief as a way of giving him strength and protection in the afterlife. Or it may have been displayed in a palace or temple as a way of showing off the kingdom's wealth and power. Speaking of power, remember that Mapungubwe was a kingdom built on trade. They thrived due to the exchange of goods and ideas with other kingdoms. But their success wasn't without challenges. Drought, attacks from neighboring kingdoms, and changes in trade routes all threatened the stability of Mapungubwe. How did this rhino reflect those challenges? Well, like the kingdom it represented, the rhino was strong but fragile. Rhinos are powerful animals, but they're also vulnerable to extinction due to factors like habitat loss and poaching. This mirrors the challenges faced by Mapungubwe and shows how the creators of the rhino saw the world around them. In addition to being a symbol of the kingdom's power and trade, the rhino also represented the people of Mapungubwe. In African cultures, animals often represent different aspects of human nature, and the rhino's strength and independence symbolized the resilience and determination of the people who lived there. The golden rhino is one of the most important artifacts from the kingdom of Mapungubwe. It's a reminder of the kingdom's wealth, power, and cultural sophistication. The rhino's unique features and symbolism make it a powerful symbol of the kingdom and its people. Now let us take a moment to think about the impact of the golden rhino on our understanding of history. The discovery of the golden rhino helped to challenge colonial narratives about Africa. Colonialism often portrayed African societies as primitive and without sophistication. But the rhino's existence showed that African kingdoms had been sophisticated and culturally rich, participating actively in the global trade networks of the time. It was a small piece of gold, yet it reshaped the narrative of Africa's history. The golden rhino is more than just a piece of history. It's a reminder of the power of symbols and the importance of understanding our cultural heritage. By studying the golden rhino and other artifacts from the kingdom of Mapundu, we can learn more about the people who lived there and gain a deeper understanding of our shared human history. Imagine a vast network of interconnected communities spanning over 3,000 square miles. This intricate web of settlements reached from the Limpopo River in modern-day South Africa all the way to the Indian Ocean coast, encircling cities like Sofala and extending its influence to the heart of the continent. At the center of this expansive realm stood the majestic Mapanyubu Hill, a natural fortress overlooking the confluence of the Limpopo and Shash rivers. Here, nestled amidst rolling grasslands and fertile valleys, thrived the capital city of the same name. Established around 1220 CE by a chief named Dinga Sitza, Mapungabu quickly evolved into a sophisticated urban center and a seat of royal power. Its strategic location at the crossroads of major trade routes ensured its prominence as a vital hub for the exchange of goods and ideas. From the bustling marketplaces to the grand royal court, Mapanubwe pulsated with activity. Traders from distant lands converged here, bringing with them exotic spices, silks, and ivory. Craftsmen plied their trade, creating exquisite works of art, and skilled laborers constructed impressive buildings and infrastructure. The streets teemed with merchants, artisans, scholars, and diplomats from across the known world. It was a melting pot of cultures and a testament to the kingdom's thriving economy and diplomatic prowess. Under the reign of King Thobi Jane, who took the throne around 1300 CE, Mapungabu reached the zenith of its power and glory. Thobi Jane proved to be an astute ruler, expanding his dominion far beyond the borders of his predecessors. His ambitious nature drove him to forge alliances with neighboring chiefdoms and establish control over strategic trade routes. One of his most notable conquests was the subjugation of the Butua kingdom, located to the north of Mip. By incorporating Butua's rich resources and skilled labor force into his empire, Tubani secured a solid foundation for his kingdom's growth. He implemented efficient systems of governance, ensuring stability and prosperity throughout his vast realm. Tributes appointed loyal officials to oversee various aspects of administration, collecting taxes, maintaining law and order, and representing the kingdom in diplomatic missions. This well-organized bureaucracy enabled the smooth functioning of Mapanyubu's government and facilitated the efficient allocation of resources. Moreover, Tubiane recognized the importance of education and scholarship, establishing centers of learning where scholars from neighboring kingdoms were invited to teach and research. These institutions served as reservoirs of knowledge, preserving and transmitting ancient wisdom and fostering intellectual growth. The reputation of Mapundubi's royal court as a patron of learning attracted scholars from across Africa, creating a vibrant intellectual community. The kingdom's strategic location along major trade routes contributed significantly to its economic prosperity. Mapandubi served as a crucial link between the interior regions of Africa and the thriving coastal cities engaged in maritime trade. Traders passing through the kingdom brought with them a variety of goods, including gold, ivory, exotic animals, and precious stones. Through taxing these goods and controlling the flow of commerce, Mapandubi's rulers amassed considerable wealth. The revenue generated from trade also enabled the kingdom to support a large military force. ensuring the safety of its extensive borders and protecting its interests against potential rivals. Furthermore, Mapungabu's rulers utilized their wealth to construct impressive architectural structures, adorning their cities with magnificent palaces, temples, and defensive walls. These grand projects not only showcased the kingdom's power and prestige, but also provided employment opportunities for countless artisans and laborers. But Mapungabu's reign was not without its challenges. Around 1340, the kingdom faced a devastating drought that lasted several years. The prolonged dry spell resulted in crop failure, widespread famine, and the death of countless people. The once fertile lands turned barren, forcing many to abandon their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. Though the kingdom did recover somewhat, the drought had a profound impact on its population and resources. It was during this time of instability that the legendary Queen Majaji ascended to the throne. Renowned for her wisdom and resilience, she skillfully navigated the treacherous political landscape, forging alliances with neighboring kingdoms and implementing policies to alleviate the suffering of her people. The Queen played a pivotal role in stabilizing the kingdom and setting it on the path to recovery. Under her leadership, Mapunube began to rebuild its infrastructure, revitalize its economy, and reaffirm its position as a regional power. Her reign marked a turning point in the kingdom's history, demonstrating the strength and adaptability of its institutions. Yet, despite the best efforts of its leaders, Mapungabu's prosperity was not destined to last. By the late 15th century, the kingdom's power and influence waned, as it faced increasing pressure from rival African states. As the Songhai Empire expanded its dominion southward, Mapungabu found itself caught in the crossfire of competing interests. The once mighty kingdom was gradually diminished, its territory shrinking under the weight of external forces. It seemed as though the golden era of Mapundawad was drawing to a close. One of the key factors contributing to Mapundawad's decline was the changing dynamics of long-distance trade. As new trade routes opened up and European powers began exploring the African coast, the strategic importance of Mapunube diminished. The kingdom's geographic location, once a source of advantage, now placed it on the periphery of major trading networks. With the rise of coastal cities like Sofala and Kilwa, which enjoyed direct access to the sea, Mapungabu's rulers faced challenges in maintaining their dominance in the region. The coastal cities offered shorter and more efficient routes for merchants, resulting in a decline in Mapungabu's economic importance. Moreover, internal conflicts and power struggles within Mapungabu's ruling elite also weakened the kingdom's stability. As rival factions competed for control, the focus shifted from territorial defense and economic prosperity to internal power struggles. This internal strife distracted from the kingdom's larger responsibilities and contributed to its overall decline. As the 15th century progressed, Mapungabu's population began to dwindle. Its cities emptied, its fields lay abandoned. The once vibrant cultural and economic hub faded into obscurity, leaving behind only whispers of its former glory. The exact date of Mapungabu's demise remains a mystery, lost to the annals of time. Historians can only estimate that the kingdom's collapse occurred sometime around the late 15th century. The reasons for its disappearance are equally elusive, shrouded in the mists of the past. Some speculate that ecological changes, such as shifts in rainfall patterns or the depletion of natural resources, played a significant role. Others suggest that the kingdom's isolation from major trade routes contributed to its downfall. However, the true cause of Mapungabu's decline remains an enigma, known only to the winds that rustled through its deserted cities. In the end, Mapungubu's legacy lies not only in its impressive ruins and the artifacts it left behind, but also in its enduring spirit. The kingdom's resilience in the face of adversity, its commitment to education and scholarship, and its strategic acumen continue to inspire awe and wonder. Mapa Nubwe reminds us of the power of human ambition and the complexities of African history, urging us to delve deeper into the stories of our past. Boer life in the 1800s was not an adventure of exploration, but the hard, steady reality of making a home and a living on the treeless, endless plains of the Highveld and elsewhere in the interior of South Africa. In the stillness of those vast grasslands, the sun's daily journey was marked not by mountains or trees, but by the monotonous sway of grasses in the wind. Here, time was measured not just in seasons, but in the smaller cycles of daily chores, cattle drives, and family meals. And like the trek itself, survival on the farmstead demanded an almost painful attention to detail, where every repaired harness and mended fence could mean the difference between a good harvest and ruin. Every dawn began before the sun. Roosters crowed somewhere in the growing light, and the creak of wagon wheels being checked outside roused men from sleep. It was a sound as familiar as the ticking of a clock and as insistent as the call of duty. Most men rose before sunrise to tend the cattle, inspect the fields, or ride out to distant grazing lands. They were not accompanied by the lilting tunes of birdsong, but by the lowing of cattle waiting to be driven, the bleating of restless goats seeking release, and the clucking of hens eager for their day's foraging. The symphony of the farm was one of urgency and activity. It was a reminder that even with the comforts of a farmstead, life for the Boer trekker was far from idyllic. Women rose too, preparing the hearth, kneading bread and boiling maize porridge, while children were sent for water, chopped wood, or drove the goats into This division of labor was as ingrained as the lines on their palms. Boys took to herding cattle early, learning the ways of the veldt. Before they could read a book, girls learned to spin, sew, and milk cows before they could reach a Bible. But this was not a life of quiet domesticity. This was a school of necessity, where lessons were learned not from books, but from blisters on their hands and the dust that caked their skin. As the sun climbed higher, the farm throbbed with activity. Oxen lowed, waiting to be yoked and driven. Fields shimmered, heavy with the promise of grain. Tobacco leaves curled thick in the sun, and herds grazed fat on the veldt grass. The air hummed with the drone of insects and the buzz of life. It was a scene of plenty, a testament to the resilience of the Boers and their deep understanding of the land. But it was also a scene laced with tension. For every day of shimmering maize fields and contented cattle, there were others where locust swarms blotted the sky. Rust-infected crops and sudden cold snaps killed off calves. The Boer trekker lived on a knife's edge between plenty and famine, between a full harvest and the gnawing emptiness of hunger. Each day was a battle against the elements, against disease, and against the constant threat of losing everything. Yet even in the face of such uncertainty, life on the farm continued. Repairs were made, fences were mended, and plans for the future were laid. For the ox wagon itself remained the heartbeat of a trekker's life, even after they had settled into farmsteads. These wagons were not only for migration, they became storerooms, workshops, and sometimes makeshift shelters when farmhouses were under repair. They were more than just a mode of transport or a shelter on wheels. They were a symbol of resilience, a tangible link to their past struggles and an assurance for their future. The daily rituals of checking harness and greasing wheels became a form of communion with this iconic part of their heritage. Leather harnesses were checked, wheels greased, yokes carved smooth to prevent injury to oxen. Each detail mattered, because a broken wagon could mean the difference between surviving the season or slipping into ruin. Farming in this interior land was an endless wrestle with the soil. Some days yielded abundance. Maize fields shimmering green, tobacco leaves curling thick in the sun, herds grazing fat on veldt grass. Other days were cruel. Locust swarms blotting the sky, rust infecting crops, or sudden cold snaps killing off calves. The Boer trekker lived on a knife's edge between plenty and famine. The Bible held firm under such uncertainty, its pages offering solace, its words lending strength. Mornings began with prayers, spoken softly as the family stirred. Evenings ended with hymns sung softly as the veldt fell silent. The farmhouse, though sturdy, was not immune to the hardships of the land. Drafts snaked through cracks in the walls. Rain sometimes leaked through the thatch. But these discomforts were shared, not just endured. They were part of the daily rhythm, a steady drumbeat in the symphony of farm life. And within these four walls, stories unfolded. The crackle of the fire was a storyteller, whispering tales of the day gone by. The creak of the old house was a historian, recounting years of laughter and tears. The scent of wood smoke was a lullaby, wrapping dreams in its earthy embrace. The farmhouse was not just a shelter, it was a witness to lives lived, hopes nurtured and challenges overcome. It was the center of the farm, the heart of the family and the keeper of their history. The isolation of the farm was palpable, broken only by the arrival of traders or neighbors, bringing news of the outside world, perhaps of wars raging far away, or families planning to trek further into the unexplored parts of the land. Yet, even in this seeming tranquility, danger was never far. A farmstead was not a fortress, but an outpost. At any moment, travelers might arrive. Traders, neighbors, or strangers whose intentions were uncertain. And so men kept rifles leaning against doorways and dogs trained to bark at the faintest sound in the dark. The farm's rhythm was not just about crops and cattle, but about vigilance. Survival on the frontier demanded both bread and bullets, sustenance and security. But even in this existence of hardship and solitude, life went on. Children were born, cattle thrived, and the seasons turned again and again. Through it all, the daily rhythms of the farmstead continued. The sun rose and set, the animals were tended to, and the family gathered around their meager table, sharing what they had and hoping for the best. Their faith, their family, and their fierce independence were their shields against the harshness of their world. And so they lived, the Boer trekkers on their farms in the South African interior, bound to the land, bound to each other, and bound to their own indomitable spirit. The vast expanse of grassland known as the veldt could be remarkably generous, providing bountiful grazing for their herds and sustenance for their families. However, this seemingly endless plain had its own temperament, capable of turning into a furnace that scorched the land and tested the resilience of those who inhabited it. Drought was the silent yet relentless enemy of the Afrikaner farmer, creeping in slowly until the land cracked and the rivers shrunk to mere trickles. Days stretched on under skies that refused to weep, and each sunrise brought the same merciless glare that scorched both crops and spirits. In these times of scarcity, the Afrikaners turned their eyes heavenward, seeking deliverance in prayer. Men gathered beneath the shade of thorn trees or around their wagons, hats in hand, voices lifted in psalms. They prayed for rain, for mercy, for the land to remember its covenant of fertility. Women lit candles inside the farmhouse, whispering prayers over their children as dust settled on the windowsills. Their faith was not merely ornamental, it was a lifeline, the thin rope that held despair at bay. Yet sometimes prayers did not bring clouds. Sometimes the drought deepened, forcing desperate measures. Farmers would slaughter weakened cattle before they dropped dead, salting and drying the meat to stretch their provisions. Crops were sometimes abandoned mid-season, families turning instead to hunting or foraging for roots, berries, and wild game. Every choice was a calculation: how to endure without breaking. To survive in this unforgiving terrain, the Dutch settlers developed a deep connection with their land and livestock. Cattle became more than just property. They were partners in survival. When the rains failed, farmers knew when to move their herds to better grazing. When predators stalked their wagons, the cattle provided not only food, but also a sense of security. The close bond between humans and animals was a testament to the harsh realities of their existence on the frontier. Even the landscape itself bore witness to their struggle. The veldt, with its rolling grasslands and stark horizon, became a character in their stories. In the face of such grandeur, the Afrikaners learned to be self-sufficient, resourceful, and deeply connected to the rhythms of nature. They understood the language of the land, reading the signs of rain or drought, knowing where to find hidden springs or edible plants. This intimate knowledge wasn't just practical, it was a source of identity, shaping their values, their culture, and their very survival. But the resilience born of adversity was not limited to the individual. It also defined their communities. The trek and wagon groups developed intricate social networks. Neighbors who might have otherwise quibbled over grazing rights now shared waterholes and pooled their labor. One family's wagon might carry another's children to safety if wells ran dry. There was an unspoken understanding among them. The veldt tested them all, and only together could they outlast its cruelty. Their communal strength was evident in their ability to adapt to the challenges of the landscape. In times of drought, they managed communal grazing lands, ensuring that the precious vegetation was used judiciously. They also built sturdy shelters, whether it was the lager, a defensive circle of wagons, or the traditional rondeval, a circular hut made of mud and thatch, designed to withstand the harsh weather conditions. These structures weren't just functional, they were symbols of unity and mutual support. They showed that in the face of the elements, their collective strength was far greater than any individual's weakness. Furthermore, their spiritual beliefs provided a bedrock of strength. The Afrikaners, deeply influenced by their Calvinist theology, found solace in their faith. They saw their hardships not just as misfortunes, but as potential tests of their devotion. The concept of a covenant between God and his people gave them a sense of purpose. They believed that their calling was to persevere, to adapt, and to grow in their relationship with God despite the challenges they faced. It was this profound belief that allowed them to endure the scorching heat, the gnawing hunger, and the bone-deep weariness. It was the assurance that they were part of something larger than their immediate suffering, a community chosen by God to carry his word into the wilderness. Moreover, the droughts also pushed families into closer bonds with their neighbors. As resources dwindled and the threat of starvation loomed, the need for cooperation intensified. Families shared what little they had, offering food, water, and shelter to those in direst need. Children who might have otherwise played in ignorance of their elders' struggles were often called upon to help. They fetched water, assisted in the preparation of meals, and learned the ways of the land at an early age. This shared adversity fostered a sense of community that transcended everyday rivalries. It was a reminder that in the face of nature's fury, they were stronger together than they were alone. It's important to note that the impact of drought wasn't uniform across communities. Some groups were more affected than others, depending on factors like access to resources, their stage of settlement, and their social networks. For instance, newly arrived trekkers might have been more vulnerable than established communities. Those with greater access to livestock were better positioned to endure periods without rain, whereas those who relied solely on hunting might have faced more acute food shortages during dry spells. The trek and wagon system itself, while offering some protections, also had its vulnerabilities. If one wagon broke down or the oxen fell ill, the entire group's mobility and survival could be compromised. However, the most devastating aspect of the drought was the toll it took on human lives. For the Afrikaners, the loss of children to diseases linked to malnutrition was a heartbreaking reality. Watching infants or toddlers succumb to illnesses like kwashiorkor or marasmus was a gut-wrenching experience. It challenged their faith, tested their endurance, and left deep emotional scars. These losses were not just statistics, they were members of their families, their communities, and their future. The death of a child in such circumstances was a profound tragedy that echoed within the Afrikaner community long after the drought had ended. The Afrikaners didn't just endure these tragedies passively, they responded with a mixture of faith, resourcefulness, and a deep sense of community. They continued to pray, to seek solutions, and to care for those in need. Their survival instincts kicked in, leading them to make tough decisions about resource allocation, food rationing, and even migration when necessary. They leaned heavily on their social networks, sharing what little they had and helping those who were worse off. This included assisting families who lost children, providing them with emotional support and practical help. Despite the immense personal tragedies they faced, the Afrikaners demonstrated remarkable resilience. They adapted their diets, finding sustenance in foods like wild berries and tubers. They mended their belongings to make them last longer, and they preserved their food supplies ingeniously to stretch them out. They also developed a strong sense of camaraderie, drawing strength from shared stories, songs, and religious services. As the generations passed, these experiences of hardship and resilience became part of their cultural identity. It's important to recognize that the story of the Afrikaners during the droughts isn't just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, to adapt, and to find meaning even in the darkest of times. It was a story of unwavering faith, deep community bonds, and an indomitable will to survive against all odds. We've been tracing the steps of our forebears as they ventured out from the Cape Colony in search of new lands. But the trek wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about the lives they built along the way. The halting and halting of people trying to put down roots in an alien landscape. Now we're standing on the edge of understanding, poised to enter the world of the early Afrikaans farmers. So let's go back in time and see what life was like for them. Life on the Boer farmstead revolved around a simple routine, a rhythm of work and family that provided solace in the face of a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Before the sun's first light, men and women were already stirring. They had chores to complete, animals to tend, and a day's work ahead of them. The women, with calloused hands and weathered faces, moved through their tasks with a practiced grace, spinning wool, patching clothing, preparing meals, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the children who chased each other between the kraals, their laughter rising against the distant hum of cicadas. As the day wore on, the men labored in the fields, guiding the plough across the land, planting seeds, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. Every furrow was a testament to their toil, every harvest a victory over the unforgiving terrain. And as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, The family gathered at the wooden table inside the modest farmhouse. There they shared their day's catch, perhaps salted meat, maize porridge, or the rough bread baked in iron pots over the fire. It was a simple life, one measured by the rising and setting of the sun, by the changing seasons and the needs of the land. Yet, within its simplicity, there was a quiet dignity, a sense of belonging, not just to the land, but to each other. In these intimate moments, stories were shared, songs were sung, and prayers were spoken, binding them together in the face of the vast and often indifferent wilderness that surrounded them. The flickering lamplight danced on the walls, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted like the gnarled roots of an old tree. Outside, the sounds of the veldt grew louder. Crickets chirped their evening song, frogs croaked from hidden pools, and the distant howl of a jackal sent a shiver down one's spine. These were the sounds of their world, both beautiful and menacing, a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence. For life on the farmstead, even in its quietest moments, was never truly safe. Wild animals prowled the edges of the farms, leopards that stalked goats, hyenas that howled through the night, and always there was the veldt itself, hiding unseen dangers. Snakes coiled in the tall grasses, veldt fires spread like sudden storms, and disease could sweep through the household without warning. In this world, every sunrise was a victory, every full moon a cause for celebration. The rhythm of life went on, steady and sure, a heartbeat echoing the pulse of the earth. In this small corner of the world, they carved out their lives, slowly, painstakingly, but with a fierce determination. Their homes, though humble, were sanctuaries. Within four walls, they shielded themselves from the unforgiving elements and the wild uncertainties that lay beyond. Here they found solace. Here they found strength to face another day. As the years passed, the farm grew, changed hands, saw new generations. But the essence of life here remained much the same. The cycle of sowing and harvesting, the ebb and flow of seasons, the quiet companionship of family, the struggle for survival was constant, yet the will to live, to love, to hope was stronger. And then there were nights when the wind fell silent, the stars blazed bright, and a rare peace settled over the land. The crackle of the hearth, the sound of him singing drifting into the veldt, the stars stretching endlessly across the sky. In those moments, the hardships of the day receded, replaced by a quiet joy in simply being alive, in being part of something larger than themselves. The children, half asleep on reed mats, carried dreams of a future free from wandering, a home secured at last. And the elders, their faces etched with the stories of a hard life, looked out at the endless expanse of the night sky, finding comfort in the unchanging stars. Under such a vast and ancient canopy, their worries seemed small, their joys more profound. These were the stolen moments of happiness, the precious intervals of tranquility that sustained them through the harder times. But history would not grant permanence so easily. The droughts came and went, taking with them precious resources and loved ones who couldn't bear to stay. In the face of despair, they packed their meager belongings, climbed aboard wagons, and trekked away, their wheels carving ruts into the red earth, their footsteps adding to the long saga of human migration. Each ending was also a beginning for children, took up the plows and rifles of their parents, carrying on the struggle under the same unrelenting sun. As seasons turned into years and decades rolled by, the farmstead bore witness to it all, to the laughter of children, the rumble of thunder, the murmur of prayers. Each scar, each weather-beaten board in the house, each furrow on the land whispered tales of those who'd come before. And so life on the farmstead played out its drama year after year, a cycle of toil and triumph, loss and renewal. Through it all, they held on to hope, to the promise of a better day, to the dream of a homeland secured at last. The sun dips below the horizon, leaving behind streaks of crimson and gold across the vast canvas of the sky. A gentle breeze rustles through the long grass, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the whisper of 1,000 untold stories. The fireflies begin their evening dance, twinkling like fallen stars in the gathering dusk. In the heart of this timeless landscape, the spirit of endurance burns bright, a testament to the unyielding human spirit that refuses to be subdued by the harsh embrace of the veldt. The Boers, or Afrikaans farmers, as we now call them, have etched their story onto the very fabric of this land. Their lives, their struggles, and their triumphs have become one with the rhythm of the seasons. The ebb and flow of life in the great African wilderness. As night falls and the stars begin their vigil in the inky expanse above, we are left with a profound sense of the resilience of the human spirit. These individuals, driven by dreams of freedom, faith, and a piece of land to call their own, have tamed the wilderness, not by force, but by sheer determination and an unbreakable bond with the land they inhabit. Their saga is a reminder that beneath the harsh exterior of a seemingly unforgiving landscape lies a story of courage, adaptation, and an enduring spirit that continues to shape the course of history. Welcome back into the hush of night. We have walked with the Voortrekkers as their wagons creaked across dry plains, felt the sickness that haunted their camps, and heard the crack of rifles in distant skirmishes. We watched as Retief and his men stepped into Dingaan's kraal with hope, only to find betrayal waiting in the shadows. We turned north to the ruins of Mp, where a tiny golden rhino whispered of kingdoms long before the wagons ever rolled. And at last, we stood at the threshold of a Boer farmstead, a place of hymn singing, drought prayers, and quiet dangers beneath the endless sky. Here then, beneath this canopy of stars, our journey ends, and yet it is not a goodbye. For the spirit of the road, the thirst for horizons, the courage to keep moving, that is a welcome here, a promise carried on the wind. The fires may dwindle, the oxen grow quiet, but the tales of the trek continue. They shift and change, becoming one with the dust of the veldt and the whispers of the baobab trees. The Voortrekkers dreamed of permanence, of a land where they could put down roots and build a life unthreatened, yet the Africa that welcomed them was a continent of flux. The old ways were never truly gone. They echoed in the faces of the people they encountered, in the landscapes they traversed, and in the very stars that guided their way. No matter how far they pushed north, east, or west, the past was never truly behind them. It walked beside them, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. Theirs was a journey not just of miles, but of emotions, of hopes that soared with sunrises and crashed with storms, of fears that stalked in the night and faded with the dawn. There were moments of joy, of community, of faith, tested and reaffirmed around flickering campfires. But there were also times of despair, of loss, of grappling with the consequences of their decisions. Yet, through it all, the land responded. In its own language, Africa gave and took. It offered solace in valleys, sustenance from its rivers, and tested their resolve with droughts and disease. It mirrored their struggles, their triumphs, and their tragedies. To be on this land was to be part of a story that stretched back far beyond the Voortrekkers, and would continue long after their fires had died down. Here, at the crossroads of history, beneath a sky that seems to hold all the stories of the world, we pause. The past isn't just a collection of dates and names. but a tapestry woven with emotions, dreams, choices, and consequences. It's a story that begs to be heard, not just for what it tells us about the Boer trekkers, but for what it reveals about the enduring spirit of Africa and the timeless journey of humanity. As the fire burns low and the night deepens, let the silence speak. In the rustle of leaves, hear the echoes of a people on the move. In the vastness of the sky, see the dreams that guided them. And when the stars begin to fade, take with you the lessons of the road, the strength to face the unknown, the courage to keep going, the wisdom to seek understanding, and the hope that even in the darkest night, the sun will rise again. For this is Africa, the cradle of humanity, the theatre of our shared history. And tonight, we ended our journey under baobab skies,